Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The criminal trial of Donald Trump was turned over to the jury today. 12 of Trump's fellow New Yorkers, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, deliberated for a total of about 4.5 hours today before being dismissed for the day shortly after 4 o'clock. Now, this afternoon, the jury sent 2 notes to Judge Juan Merchan requesting to rehear 4 sections of witness testimony as well as the judge's instructions. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9:30 with the court reporter reading back those relevant parts of the transcript before the jury continues to deliberate. Now, the one consistent rule about juries is that you just do not know what they're going to do. When you put 12 random strangers in a room, the outcome is never obvious. But we do know that there are 3 possibilities, broadly. The jury could acquit Donald Trump on any or all of the 34 counts against him. All 12 jurors have to agree on that unanimously. We could get a hung jury if all 12 jurors cannot agree either way. It only takes 1 holdout for that outcome. Or the jury could decide to convict Trump if they unanimously agree he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, there are 34 separate felony counts at play here, so this could be mixed and matched in a variety of ways. Understandably, a lot of people are very invested in the outcome of this trial. I do think it matters. But no matter what happens, I really do believe that the process has already been a victory for the rule of law and a rebuttal to the worst, most dangerous aspects of Trumpism. The fact the former president was investigated, charged, and tried by a jury of his peers shows that no one is above the law in America. Of course, that's not Donald Trump's vision of the law. In his view, there is no such thing, crucially, as a neutral, free, and fair process, like a trial or an election. All that matters is outcome. If he wins, it was fair. If he loses, it was rigged. He has said this about everything from his legal trials to multiple presidential elections to the Emmy Awards. That is Donald Trump's authoritarian view of the world. Power trumps all. The powerful get to dictate what happens. It is the opposite of our core civic commitments of equal rights, equal protections, and equal justice under the law. That we are all subject to the same fair processes, and then we respect the outcomes of those processes. It's the basis of the liberal democratic project. In a way, this first criminal trial of Donald Trump has been a big test for America. For the first time in our history, a former president has been prosecuted and tried for committing a crime. We know this process works in some of our peer democratic countries. It's happened in lots of places. In France, in South Korea, Taiwan, where former presidents have been successfully tried and convicted. We've seen the process play out here on the state level. I mean, 4 governors of Illinois have been sentenced to time in prison. Most recently, Rod Blagojevich, who had, by the way, his sentence commuted by none other than Donald Trump. Connecticut Governor John Rowland was convicted twice for corruption, exactly 10 years apart, spending 2 stints in prison. The former state's attorney of Baltimore was just sentenced to a year of home confinement after being convicted of perjury and mortgage fraud. Now, with the first trial of Donald Trump nearing its conclusion, this principle of equal justice for all in America is a pretty bedrock one. And just to be clear, it used to be, I think, a consensus one, and it no longer is. I mean, Trump and his Republican toadies, the people that are going up to New York dressed like Donald Trump to go stand in microphones, they all reject it. And yet this trial is a real success in its own right. For weeks, Donald Trump has had to sit in a courtroom where justice is day in, day out dispensed to regular citizens, faced a judge who was fair and firm while both sides presented their cases to a jury of his peers. All of that happened while another group of Trump lawyers are trying to convince the Supreme Court that he actually has a special status as a former president. He is a special kind of citizen, unbound by the normal processes of mere mortals. Now, Donald Trump does have more access to wealth and power and fancy lawyers than 99.9% of all criminal defendants who step into a courtroom in America. And yet the process played out exactly as it should for any American. He went through the full normal process of a trial, as any person accused of a crime would. That's what's at stake in this New York courtroom, and is what is at stake in the Supreme Court's impending decision about Trump's so-called presidential immunity. Ultimately, our entire liberal democratic order rises and falls on our ability to produce fair and neutral processes that apply equally to everyone and lead to outcomes we can all trust. If it fails, we have Trumpism, authoritarianism. So whatever the jury decides in Trump's case is not actually as important as that process. The trial of Donald Trump, I believe, has proven that that process works, independent of the outcome. And that alone is a rebuke of everything that Trump and his movement stand for. Harry Litman served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Department of Justice. Catherine Christian spent over 30 years as a prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. They both join me now. As someone that worked in that office and someone who's been in the trial every day, do you agree with that assessment that as a process, as a sort of, test of American equal justice under law, that independent of the outcome, since the jury has it now, that this has been a success?
I agree. It has been. Forgetting that it's Donald Trump and a former president of the United States, this trial was orderly. Donald Trump, inside the courtroom, behaved himself relatively. The jurors came on time. There were no hiccups throughout the trial, and most trials are like that. Some, there are hiccups. And you're right, he's not above the law. No one should be above the law. And most defendants, in many ways, he has received special treatment in some of his cases, and just that he has 4 indictments and he's free.
Right.
So that's one thing. But it is good for people to see, whatever the verdict is, whether it's a conviction or acquittal, or if there's no verdict, a hung jury, that's how the system works, and you have to respect that.
It's an important and I'd say beautiful point, really. He was brought to heel all during this trial. He had to do as others do, and it was a full and fair sort of oversight by Judge Merchan. But Merchan is really channeling the law here. It was the law that made him sit, the law that made him show up, the law that subjected him to the same thing that happens to everyone else. People are understandably jittery now. Could there be, say, a hung jury? But unanimity is one of the features of due process that he received, and in a way, that's secondary. It's possible a political response. He could be convicted and sail through. But the fact that the process has happened, it's majestic.
Yeah, this is my point. I mean, again, because we just don't know what the jury's going to do. And I almost feel, if this were the Jan 6 trial where I feel like, I know he's guilty. I saw it. I've read the report. In this case, I think it was a compelling case. And if I as a watcher, I probably think he's guilty. But again, that independence of the process. And one of the things that I've been trying to balance here, and I'd love to hear you both on this as we sort of await this, is that, at one level, it's like you don't want to be like, well, everything that runs the American justice system is great, because it clearly is not. And we know this, and you know it having been in that building for 30 years. So I don't want to say, well, if he's convicted, it's fine. People get wrongfully convicted all the time. At the same time, there's something so insidious to me about the entire Republican Party marshaling behind, as a kind of party line, that this is a corrupt enterprise to its core.
And that was, to me, the most offensive part of the trial, which wasn't about the trial, but the Speaker of the House of Representatives, senators, Congress people, outside of a courthouse while a trial is ongoing, basically trashing the process, criticizing the judge, talk about attacking the independence of the judiciary, criticizing the judge's daughter. That was a statement against the rule of law. The trial was ongoing, and they were doing that. And, it was shameful to me.
And that's even kicked up a notch in the last few days, where you have Republicans lying. Either they're stupid or pretending to be stupid, I never know, but about what exactly the jury's instructions are, saying, well, they don't even have to be unanimous in the same crime. That has to do with this sort of step-up thing. But you have Marco Rubio and others, just promulgating these sort of lies and calumny against Merchan and the whole process happening now.
That's exactly right. But that's the political sphere. Somewhere in a courtroom, a kind of homely courtroom in Manhattan, everything that we hold dear happened, and it really demonstrated his being subject to the same processes never. I think just that part itself, in fact, kind of brought him down. He's someone who embodies the principle that nobody can tell me what to do, and here the law told him what to do, and forcefully for several weeks.
So today we finally heard from Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito in the form of 2 letters he sent to members of Congress. He explained why 2 flags associated with the insurrection flew at his 2 homes, refused their request to recuse from current cases related to Donald Trump and January 6th before the court. There is one key figure we have not heard from yet. That's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who has said nothing about the myriad scandals that are undermining Americans' confidence in his court. Roberts has not responded to 2 top Democratic senators on the Judiciary Committee who wrote him last week asking he ensure Alito recuses himself. and requesting a meeting as soon as possible to discuss other steps to, quote, address the Supreme Court's ethics crisis. Congressman Dan Goldman's a Democrat in New York. He, along with Congressman Hank Johnson, authored a letter to Justice Alito calling on him to recuse. The letter was signed by 43 of his colleagues, and he joins me now. Well, you got a response.
Yeah.
What is your response to the response?
It's pretty shocking. The fact that Justice Alito thinks that he can be the judge and jury of his own impartiality flies in the face of Supreme Court precedent, flies in the face of the Constitution, flies in the face of federal law, and completely misapplies the standard that he is supposed to be applying, even given the fact that there's no binding code of ethics on him, and he essentially gets to decide this himself. But the standard is whether a reasonable person, or whether a person could reasonably think that he has some degree of a bias or partiality. It is not whether he does or doesn't.
Right.
It is whether it is reasonable for someone to conclude that he has an appearance of a conflict of interest. And for him to actually say in this letter that it is completely unreasonable for anyone to think that when he flies a Stop the Steal flag, or a Stop the Steal flag is flying from his home, that somehow is not reasonable 11 days after, or the January 6th, to think that he has some political bias about a case related to Stop the Steal that flag in January 6th is just bewildering.
Yeah, I mean, his argument is, my wife did all this, and she's an independent woman she co-owns our house. He says at one point in the letter, I can't, she has a right to do whatever she wants, the property. So I can't control it at all. And therefore, no reasonable person, unless someone with an ideological bias, could think that I have to recuse, therefore I won't. But at a deeper constitutional level, it seems to me that, again, all this stuff is pointing towards this real sort of constitutional standoff between the branches. I mean, their assertion, the court's current assertion is, you can't make us do anything. We are an independent branch, and no one can make us recuse about anything, and, you should go take a long walk off or short pier, Congressman.
Well, right.
I mean, that's really what they think.
100%, which is baffling given the jurisdiction that Congress has conferred on the Supreme Court, the funding that we give to the judiciary as a co-equal branch. We obviously have oversight and leverage over the Supreme Court. Otherwise, we don't have co-equal branches of government. But even under the Supreme Court's precedent itself, recently, a judge's spouse is sufficient to implicate a judge in whatever conflict of interest there may be. This is not old, 100-year-old. This was Justice Kennedy. And Jamie Raskin, the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, has a terrific op-ed in the New York Times, which really goes through the actual case law as to why it is not just up to Justice Alito and the Supreme Court with their non-binding advisory code of ethics, unlike every other judge in the land, but that they are actually required to recuse if, in a circumstance like this, there is an obvious and reasonable appearance of a conflict of interest. It doesn't have to be an actual conflict.
Right.
An appearance is enough. And it is absurd for Justice Alito and, frankly, Justice Thomas as well, given that his wife was involved.
Gave testimony to the January 6th committee.
And was involved texting Mark Meadows related to the same conduct, the same facts that are before this court in two cases.
Yeah.
It's not just that they have a bias toward Donald Trump, so any executive action that Donald Trump made, you would do. It is the same factual pattern that is before the court that, if you believe Justice Alito, both of their spouses made political statements about. That is obvious. And at a minimum, it is reasonable to think that there is an appearance.
Yeah, there's obviously the federal criminal case against Donald Trump for his conduct up to, in the aftermath of the election up to January 6th. There's also this Fisher case before the court about one of the charges, which is conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, which is before the court as well. I guess the next question is, it is notable to me, you guys wrote to Alito, right, on the House side. The Senate Judiciary wrote to Roberts. Mm-hmm. and they got a letter back from Alito, which itself is kind of wild.
Look,
I mean, they didn't write to Alito. They wrote to Roberts. They got a letter back from Alito. It's like, okay, Justice Roberts, you're the person who comes before the court annually when he does, when he comes before Congress to ask for funding, whatever. Like, we want to talk to you. And so far, nothing.
It underscores the problem that the Supreme Court has right now, which is that technically, Chief Justice Roberts doesn't actually have any authority over Justice Alito to require him to recuse other than as part of a larger court decision, if there were to be a request. But what is shocking about this is that we are now on the precipice of an irreparable, harmful decision by two justices who, to any other federal judge in the country, would recuse. And it is up to Chief Justice Roberts to save the court's legitimacy right now. And for him to not respond to Senator Durbin and Senator Whitehouse, and instead for Alito to respond to them, is truly flouting Congress's oversight authority and Congress's role as a co-equal branch. And it does not bode well for what is to come over the next few weeks, when I think the biggest travesty in Supreme Court history may occur if these two justices rule on cases about which they are clearly conflicted.
I mean, I think Plessy and Korematsu is still...
Fair enough. The biggest ethical.
Yes, okay.
Biggest ethical.
I just want to be clear on that.
Ethical
Congressman
tragedy.
Dan Goldman, it's great to have you. Thank you very much.